views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forum. I am Daren, Jaime, and of course, we invite you to join us here on this show. People ask, what is the Social Justice Forum about? Well, it's an opportunity to provide a deeper understanding of many of the inequities that people face from across the city, the state, even the nation and the world. We understand these inequities. We present multiple points of view. We have a discussion, and we also promote civic engagement. On this show, we'll be talking about veterans. On this show, we'll be talking about human rights and then some. So stay with us. The Social Justice Forum starts now. And we welcome you back. The New York City Veterans Alliance is a member-driven grassroots policy, advocacy, and community building organization advancing veterans and families as civic leaders in New York City and beyond. The Alliance envisions the community of veterans, military members, and their families being recognized, appreciated, and fully able to access services in New York City, New York State, and nationally, regardless of political affiliation, race, religion, immigration status, gender identity, or sexual orientation. As the leading advocacy voice for veterans and families in New York City, their mission is to empower veterans, families, and civilian allies, connecting as a community to advocate for improved policies and advance as civic leaders. Joining me now to share a little bit more about their point of view on this matter, I'm joined by the Deputy Director of New York City Veterans Alliance, James C. Fitzgerald. And James, good to have you.
No, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. You come at a good time. I mean, a lot has been happening across the world, the nation, and particularly nationally. We know that veterans have been the target of what's been going on in Washington, D.C. recently. The Biden administration with new executive orders. Let's unpack that a little bit and get your thoughts on some of the executive orders that the Biden administration has carried out. The first one dealing with transgenders in the military. Talk to us about your thoughts.
It was a wonderful day to see President Biden sign the executive order lifting the trans ban. There were so many service members that were plagued by, just that very gesture. It's good to have an administration that is supportive of our LGBTQ plus service members, because basically that was singling out a specific portion of our population and saying that you're not good enough. You're not able to serve your country. So having an administration that embraces the many shades that service comes in is, a great day for the veteran community as a whole, but it's also a good day for our nation's military. One of the strengths of our military is the inclusive nature that brings new leadership to the forefront, bringing those new ideas and bringing a new perspective that can lead us in a much more efficient and effective direction.
What does it mean to see the president enact this so quickly? I mean, not even in office but full week, and yet and still we see this happen.
It shows a lot when it comes to priorities of this specific administration, when it comes to military and veteran issues. One other thing that I'm extremely proud to see this administration bring back is the Joining Forces program that was initially started during the Obama administration. Through then First Lady Michelle Obama and then Second Lady Jill Biden. So it's wonderful to see now First Lady Jill Biden bring this program back to support our military and veteran community through multiple different avenues of approach, but mainly focusing on education, employment, and wellness, which are three sectors that we desperately need right now to be enhanced within our specific community.
So as we look at the Biden administration now taking place and taking shape, give us your thoughts on what you're looking forward to seeing when it comes to the issue of veterans, because it seems as though, and I'll use your word priorities, that the president seems like veterans are a priority.
I would absolutely agree that, President Biden has the military and veteran community as a priority, coming from a military family himself. I'm sure that, he continuously wakes up and goes to sleep with this being on his mind, the very state of nature for our military, but also First Lady Jill Biden being that military mother herself. And, the traditional position of the First Lady has been to, be a mother figure to the military, to oversee their well-being and make sure that they're taken care of. So I do see that this administration is taking leaps and bounds to go out of their way to show that, this is going to be a priority of the entire administration to ensure that our community is strengthened. The nomination of Dennis McDonough as the incoming VA secretary is, very promising for our veteran community. We've seen the great things that this individual was able to do as the chief of staff for President Obama. So bringing all that experience and knowledge to our veteran community as VA secretary is something that we're very excited to see. But we also have very high expectations for this incoming administration, to include the incoming nominee for the VA secretary. We have a lot of work that needs to be done inside of our VA organization, and we're hoping to see great results from Dennis McDonough. And his success is the success of the veteran community. So we're all rooting him on. And I would like to extend a bit of gratitude to the Biden administration for selecting this candidate to fill this position. We need some fresh eyes sometimes on the situation in order to bring about that change that's been needed for quite a while. So we're all going to be waiting with bated breath to see what changes are going to be able to come through soon to be VA Secretary Dennis McDonough.
Can you share with us a little bit about the other issue that the Biden administration is contending with? That's the COVID-19 pandemic, the ability for people to be vaccinated, particularly veterans. What are we hearing about veteran vaccination? We know the VA hospital has gotten some doses, but what are we hearing?
What we're hearing here on the ground about the VA's role in vaccination is generally what we're hearing across the board when it comes to the rollout of the vaccination for this country. It's had its hiccups, but they're trying to work through that. And with the focus being on our older veterans now, we're trying to ensure that we protect the most vulnerable of our population. So there have been some hiccups, but the VA agency as a whole has done what they could in order to get as many of our veterans vaccinated as possible. And hopefully during this time period, we'll be able to smooth out any kinks that may be happening right now in order to move on to some of the other sectors of our veteran community, so we can start, more of the process of gaining a herd immunity throughout our community.
Well, please bring us some insight. How is COVID-19 affecting the veteran population?
Our veteran community are being impacted by COVID-19. I'm going to hit straight for what COVID-19 looks for, which are upper respiratory situations that many of our veterans are dealing with. Also, our active duty personnel that are still deploying are running into burn pits, which is the post 9/11 version of Agent Orange. So you have these situations in which veterans have been exposed to multiple toxic agents during their military service, and our active duty personnel are being exposed as we speak while on deployments. But these directly affect the upper respiratory conditions of our veterans and our active duty service members, and that's exactly what puts them at high risk during the COVID-19 pandemic. So our veteran community as a whole, not only being an aging veteran population, but dealing with some of these upper respiratory conditions that COVID-19 seeks out and makes us more vulnerable when it comes down to the medical impacts of this pandemic. The other aspects of impact to the veteran community come in a mental health respect. Many of our veterans are older. They don't have many close family and friends in order to, ensure that they're taken care of. So there's an isolation issue that comes up. There's also situations in which a lot of our veteran community at a higher rate than the general populace are homeless. So, they have one of two situations that are facing them. Either they can go to veteran specific homeless shelters in which they're going to be in communication with other individuals that may or may not have been exposed to COVID-19, or they're, out on the street facing the elements. And, it's wintertime here in New York. That's never a good time for anyone to be out on the street. We want someone to not only be in a safe and secure location, but someplace to where, they can be warm and lay their head down knowing that they're going to wake up in a secure environment.
Yeah, our studios are 2 minutes away from the Veterans Hospital, and right here in the borough of the Bronx. And one of the questions that we have is, how are hospitals faring? What are you hearing about the hospital crisis? I know that they've been inundated with COVID-19 patients, but what else can you tell us about what you're hearing about hospitals and how they're faring in all of this?
So all of our hospitals here in New York City have been inundated with veteran patients, either dealing with COVID-19 or dealing with the current conditions that they've always had as veterans. But one of the main things that I will say that has changed during the COVID-19 pandemic is the method of communication that the VA has utilized. Instead of a lot of the in-person appointments that we relied on in order to receive services, the VA as a whole have done an excellent job of transitioning to telehealth. But I will mention that, with our aging veteran population, sometimes that's a double-edged sword. We have these new technologies in order to reach our veterans, but some of our older veterans don't have the technology access in their homes. So it's a double-edged sword that we have to take a look at. But that is one of the things that we're hearing on the ground is, the shift in technology is impacting some of our veterans, mainly our older ones that don't have that access or don't have the user knowledge in order to have that being the primary means they connect with their care team. But also a lot of confusion is happening on the ground with them not having access to the actual VA facility, trying to figure out where to go to receive that same level of care. Has been an issue that's been ongoing since the beginning of the pandemic with with an effective dissemination of information. So we've been on a campaign to ensure that every single veteran that comes in contact with NYC Veterans Alliance is able to receive accurate and up-to-date information, because we know that that can be the make or break moment for a lot of our veteran families that are in need.
Yeah. Speaking of hospitals, I want to take it down to Manhattan. Recent legislation has had the renaming of the Manhattan VA. Fill us in.
So, it's a wonderful announcement that NYC Veterans Alliance is able to make after several years of advocacy and talking to our elected officials about why this change is needed. We can finally announce that the Manhattan VA Hospital is going to be renamed for the first paid and pensioned woman veteran, Margaret Cochran Corbin. So the VA hospital on 23rd Street is going to be renamed the Margaret Cochran Corbin Campus of the New York Harbor Healthcare System. It's a mouthful, but it's one of those things that I'm excited to express, because not only is this a shift in VA culture to let us know that this organization will be recognizing male service members, but also our women service members and everything in between. So this is a momentous day for the veteran community, because we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to representation and honoring our service members, past and present.
So as we talk about honoring our service members and we give honor to those who actually served, talk to me about, how do you feel as a veteran? Do you feel as though the country does a good job in recognizing veterans?
For me as a veteran, but also as a community leader for a veteran serving organization, I feel that we have so much in front of us to do when it comes to recognizing the true service and sacrifice of not only service members of our past, but also our currently serving service members. We've been engaged in a war for 2 decades now. Individuals that weren't born during 9/11 are now able to join and fight in a war that is still ongoing. So I feel that our country still has a disconnect when it comes to recognizing what it is that our military is engaged in and what comes along with that service. So I feel that we've done a decent job of acknowledging the service and the sacrifice of our veterans and of our active duty service members, but there's so much more work to be done, not only in the service aspect that's being provided to them once they conclude their active duty time, but also acknowledging the wide swath of individuals that make up our United States Armed Forces. It's not just one type of individual that joins. It's many types. And like that is the mission that we're on right now, is to show our country that our service and our sacrifices span many different sectors of our society, many different backgrounds. And it's for us to acknowledge that, but also be able to pull back that curtain and be able to identify those individuals so you can say, thank you for your service, and have an idea of what that service entails.
As we get close towards the end of our segment, I want to get the opportunity to hear from you as to some things that you have coming up and things that you want us to know.
One of the things we have coming up, we've been partnering with the Mott in order to connect veterans with a method to tell their story. So that's something that we're planning on engaging in during Black History Month. We're going to have a cohort of Black veterans to come together and be able to share their stories, but also get the tools in order to take that story to much higher lengths and be able to showcase that to other people so they can not only appreciate the service of these Black veterans, but also get an idea of what that service entails. So yet again, we can close that gap between our military and civilian populations.
Yeah. And so for people who want to get in touch, and how can they go about supporting the work of veterans and the work that you're doing?
So if you want to keep up with NYC Veterans Alliance, one of the easiest ways to do that is via social media. You can find us easily on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn by searching for NYC Veterans Alliance. You can find us on Twitter at NYC Vets Alliance. For any veteran or family member that's tuning in right now that is in need of assistance, definitely go to ourveterans.nyc. There you'll be able to click for help from our Veteran Mutual Aid program. We have a lot of veteran volunteers that are standing by waiting to provide you with any support that you may need. But if you're also wanting to keep up with the advocacy and services that NYC Veterans Alliance are producing, you can go to nycveteransalliance.org. There you'll be able to keep up with all the community news, announcements, and all the other cool endeavors that we're up to nowadays.
We want to thank you for joining us and being here with us on the show. Certainly, the great work that you're doing on behalf of veterans, and also for you as a servant and one who served our country. Thank you for your service and to our country, and your service now as you continue to be that voice for veterans. Are you optimistic about 2021?
I'm absolutely optimistic about 2021. It's going to be a great year, and there's so much potential that's going to happen, and I can't wait to see it come to our veteran community and our society as a whole.
Well, thank you for joining us, being with us, James Fitzgerald, our guest here on the Social Justice Forums from the Veterans Alliance, NYC Veterans Alliance, and we thank him for being with us here on the Social Justice Forum. And we'll be right back with more show coming up right after this.
There's a special election on Tuesday, March 23rd, and if you live in any of these neighborhoods, you'll want to pay attention. Your councilman, Andrew Cohen, is now a judge, and there are 5 candidates looking to replace him. Whoever wins on March 23rd will join New York City's primary lawmaking body, making decisions that affect you, your family, your home, and even your workplace. Starting in 2021, New York City will use ranked choice voting in primary and special elections for local offices. Ranked choice voting simply means that voters can rank up to 5 candidates in order of preference, instead of casting a vote for just one. You can still vote for just one candidate if you prefer. You can learn everything there is to know about the District 11 City Council race and the candidates by visiting ballotpedia.org and riverdalepress.com. Stay informed, and most importantly, make sure you mail your absentee ballot the day before Election Day on March 23rd, or safely head out to the polls to have your vote count and your voice heard.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community,
and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from BronxNet,
and welcome back to the show. Human Rights Watch is a global movement investigating and reporting on abuses happening all corners of the world. The movement has roughly 450 people of 70-plus nationalities who are country experts, lawyers, and journalists working to protect vulnerable minorities and civilians in wartime to refugees and children in need. They direct their advocacies towards governments and armed groups and businesses by pushing them to change or enforce laws, policies, and practices. They've worked on some of the world's biggest crises, such as Syria's civil war, the Rohingya crisis, the mass killings in the Philippines, COVID-19 worldwide, policing in the U.S., and refugees in Europe. And here now to join us and share their point of view on this matter, I'm joined by the Deputy Director of the Africa Division at Human Rights Watch, Ida Sawyer. And Ida, good to have you here on the Social Justice Forum.
Thanks, Daren. Great to be here.
Thank you. And so when we talk about the issue of human rights as it's compared to social justice, for someone who may not be so familiar about human rights, give us a little bit of background as to how you define human rights.
So human rights are universal fundamental rights that everyone is entitled to. So there are civil and political rights, as well as economic and social and cultural rights. It's everything from the right to life, so the right not to be extrajudicially killed by police and security forces, the right to food, the right to health care, the right to free speech, the right to free assembly. So there are a whole range of rights that are included in the broader human rights.
Yeah. And when we talk about human rights from your perspective, obviously you engage in a lot of work. I gave it to you. I gave some of our viewers some of the information in the intro. But give us a little bit about human rights, and we'll start from a national and a local perspective. I know that you've done some great work in New York City, particularly in the borough of the Bronx when it comes to the Mott section.
Yes, so most of my work is in Africa, but last year I was directing our crisis and conflict team. And for the first time, actually, our crisis team was deployed to work in the United States. And that was in response to the police crackdown on protests across the country that broke out after the police killing of George Floyd. And we started documenting, collecting videos and other evidence and examples of police targeting journalists, firing tear gas, firing rubber bullets, beating protesters who were peacefully out demonstrating. And we came across what happened in Mott on June 4th in the Bronx. And we found that this was one of the most aggressive incidents of police cracking down on protesters who were completely peaceful. And we felt that this was an incident that really needed to be uncovered, and we needed to dig into it a bit more. And we ended up interviewing, collecting testimony from over 80 people who participated in the protest. We collected 155 videos that were filmed during the protest and really showed from every vantage point from start to finish everything that happened. And through that, we wrote a 100-page report, and we created a 12-minute video to recreate what happened. And we showed through all of that how the police basically came in, that the protesters are marching peacefully through the Mott neighborhood. And then just before the 8 p.m. curfew, which was in place, the police tracked the protesters using a tactic that's known as kettling, leaving them with absolutely no way to disperse. And then they moved in and assaulted them, wielding batons, beating protesters, sometimes from the tops of cars, and they rounded them up for arrest. And we documented how over 250 people were arrested. At least 60 people had injuries from this incident. medics were targeted, legal observers were targeted, and it was just an egregious violation of the rights of these protesters. So so that's just one example of the report that we do.
Yeah, and let's go back to that incident in Mott Haven, the Bronx. Of course, you document that, and a great deal of your work is really based on investigation. You do a lot of investigative work before you bring it forth. So after the investigation, where have things gone since then?
Yeah, so we published our report, put out the video in September, and we really focused a lot of our advocacy on the mayor's office and the NYPD. But we want to see accountability, and our evidence showed that Terrence Monahan, who's the highest ranking uniformed officer in the NYPD, led the operation. He was present on the ground overseeing it. The police commissioner, Dermot Shea, clearly had command responsibility over this. And the next day he called this, he said that the operation in the Bronx was executed nearly flawlessly, despite all of these violations that we documented. So our message was those top officers, those most responsible, need to face accountability to show that this type of behavior is unacceptable. We haven't seen that yet. There have been the mayor deployed the Department of Investigation to carry out a report that came out late last year and confirmed many of our findings, but the recommendations, we feel, did not go nearly far enough. The mayor himself, on that same time when the report came out, he issued an apology and he said there would be changes going forward and additional trainings, but no accountability for those most responsible for this past incident. And there now have been a number of lawsuits, including by the New York State Attorney General, filed a lawsuit against New York City, against the NYPD, Mayor de Blasio, and the top commanders. So that's now out there. And then just today, in an innovative new initiative, Bronx Defenders worked with what's now called the Mott Haven Collective. So community members who were at the protest, and they're now demanding a reparations fund to be put in place to provide reparations assistance for those who were at the protest and suffered all of these harms, but also to support the community members of the Bronx and to try to start repairing the decades of damage caused by police brutality and discrimination, which really just culminated in this latest Mott Haven crackdown on the protesters last year.
Yeah. Very quickly, before we move on to the next topic, let's talk a little bit about the recommendations. What were the recommendations and why were you not satisfied?
So as I mentioned, part of it was pushing for accountability, and we haven't seen that yet. So we're going to keep pushing. But we also, through our report, what we wanted to demonstrate was that this type of police behavior that we documented wasn't just an isolated incident. These weren't just some bad apples who were misbehaving and needed to be disciplined. This is much bigger systemic problem with policing in New York City and really across the country, where this type of abusive behavior is condoned and exemplified by top commanders, and they act as if they're above the law and they won't be held accountable and that they're protected. So we're pushing for the systemic changes that we believe need to be made, and that includes reducing significantly the resources that are given to the police forces and moving some of those resources to invest in the real needs of communities. And we also feel that there needs to be much more to ensure independent accountability mechanisms. So it's not just the police investigating themselves, where the end goal is often really just to protect the police officers and not ensure justice for the victims.
Yeah, that's a big conversation, and we can have you back on another show to talk about that. The police actually policing the police and how effective is that? We can come back another time. I want to take it to an international perspective. I know you spend a lot of time dealing with the human rights issues in Africa. When we think about Africa, some of the things that come to mind are sex trafficking, human trafficking, the gross injustice with food insecurity out there. Walk us through and share with us a little bit about the work that you're seeing with regards to human rights in Africa.
Yeah, so lots of different issues we're working on. Some of them in many ways similar to the work we have been doing recently in the United States, and that's around security forces cracking down on peaceful protesters. And in many countries, we are seeing, unfortunately, a backsliding on democratic principles, a backsliding on rights around elections, with presidents trying to hang on to power by holding constitutional referendums and elections that are seriously flawed, and repressing, cracking down on the opposition, on youth protesters and others. We just saw that in Uganda this month, where President Museveni has now been declared the winner of his 6th term in an electoral process that was marred by severe irregularities and lots of violence. And the main opposition candidate, a youth pop singer, actually Bobby Wine, was under house arrest when the election results were announced, and it just marred by a lot of repression. So that's just one example, one area of our work. We also do a lot of work in conflict settings and document abuses by armed groups and security forces, killings of civilians, sexual violence, child recruitment, burning of villages, those types of violations. Really worrying conflict now in Ethiopia that we're focused a lot of our attention on. Also abuses around terrorism attacks and counterterrorism operations, where in some cases security forces are extremely abusive in their counterterrorism operations, killing civilians just because of their ethnicity, who are accused of or suspected of collaborating with armed Islamist groups, and that really just fuels recruitment into these armed Islamic groups. We also do a lot of work around women's rights and children's rights. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we've also looked at how lockdowns have had disproportionate impact on more vulnerable communities and impacted their ability to eat and get access to their basic livelihoods. So a whole range of human rights issues that we're working on.
Yeah, impacting change, to be able to impact change. How do you feel that your organization is able to impact change by the work that you do? So
we are at work to try to bring about change. Comes from a number of different ways. So part of it is first it's based on the investigation. So we need to have good, strong evidence to back up what we're documenting. And then we always push to try to determine who was responsible, and then name names of the perpetrators, and then look at who's supporting them, who are the higher level commanders, and we push for accountability. But we can also look at who has influence over these actors. So for example, we can press for targeted sanctions to be imposed against those most responsible for serious abuses. So that can include travel bans or asset freezes. That's one way to try to influence the behavior of these actors so they aren't sanctioned and aren't subject to these types of restrictions. And then we also work with partners and work with local actors on the ground. We're seeing, big rise in youth movements across much of Africa, where courageous youth activists are going out on the streets and demanding change, and working together with them is a really powerful way to try to hold these powerful leaders to account.
When we talk about youth activism and being engaged in the human rights struggle, talk to me. Do we see an emergence of youth? Before we know that youth have been the game changer, if you will, in many ways of turning the tide, particularly a lot of what we saw locally, Black Lives Matter, has a huge impact, a youth impact. Talk to us about the youth impact on an international scale.
Yeah, we see it around the world, and a lot of my work in Africa, we've seen the impact. I lived for 9 years in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there it was really the youth movements and youth activists who led the push for change. The former president, Joseph Kabila, was hanging on to power, cracking down on everyone, highly abusive, and it was really these youth activists getting out on the streets, demanding change, that forced the former president to finally hold elections. We've seen it more recently in Nigeria with the End SARS movement. which is really led by women and youth activists, young people saying enough is enough. Police forces targeting young people and using violence against people. And they went out on the streets. Eventually their protests did lead to the government announcing that they would disband the abusive unit, the SARS unit. But the struggle is real. I mean, those protests were met with serious repression, and it's a really, the challenges are cut out for youth activists across the continent and across the world.
People want to know how they can get connected and supporting the work that you do. How can they do that?
All of our reports and information, they're online. Our website is hrw.org. We're also on Twitter, on Instagram, and we would love for people to follow us and support us. And we have offices. We have our headquarters is in New York, and offices around the world. And on our website, there are ways to get in touch with people working on different countries and different issues.
And in the near future, what can we look forward to coming out of your organization?
So we're doing now, a big report now that we're working on Ethiopia and the conflict in Tigray, where we're documenting really serious abuses by all forces there. So that's one report that I'm working on now.
And Ida, we want to thank you for the work that you're doing with Human Rights Watch. Thank you for being a guest here on the Social Justice Forums. Listen, we've got more shows. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right back in a few.
When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone. Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
And welcome back to the show. The Journey for Justice Alliance is a national network of Black and Brown-led grassroots community-based organizations that are committed to utilizing grassroots organizing to win community-driven school improvement in order to achieve equity in public education. The network launched in 2012 in response to the growing problem of school privatization, with issues of starvation in neighborhood schools, school closings, charter and contract school expansion impacting cities across the United States. Now, J4J has member organizations in over 30 cities across the country. And joining us now to share their point of view on this matter, I'm joined by the National Director of the Journey for Justice Alliance, Jitu Brown. And Jitu, good to have you.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you having me.
Hey, thank you. And when we talk a little bit about the school system, obviously it is a social justice issue. Talk to us about how you envision or how you see the school system and the correlation between the school system and social justice.
Yes, sir. We know that. So again, brother, thank you for having me on the show. And I will I'll try to make it strong but not long. Okay. So
okay.
So, you know, we know that the first public schools that served Black people in the United States were the African free schools. That were organized in New York and Philadelphia towards the end of the 18th century, and it was an alliance between abolitionists and the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So, in other words, in its origin, it was a fight for social justice. Unfortunately, despite heroic efforts, by our elders and our ancestors, woefully inequitable. And instead of confronting that inequity, what we've seen school districts do now is to broker the responsibility of educating our children to private operators. Now, we're not saying that we want the status quo. What we're saying is we demand equity in public education. So a part of that means things like community schools, community voice in what schools look like. The reason why Journey for Justice Alliance was able to unite so easily was that mothers and fathers, not activists, mothers and fathers in Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago, Baltimore, New York, Oakland, Little Rock, Arkansas, Jackson, Mississippi, Birmingham, Alabama, we had a common denominator in our pain. And that common denominator is that people run institutions in our community based on their opinions of us. We don't have control over those institutions. So the inequity of having Black schools with no librarian, or 35 to 40 children in the classroom and the teacher has no teacher aide, or young people not having access to culturally relevant and responsible curriculum, all of those things contribute to our school's struggles. And instead of demanding a collective demand that that's what we must have in return for our political support, what we've seen happen now is that privatizers, people who profit off the education of Black children, now are getting increasing power in our public education systems, and these charter systems actually divert resources from traditional public schools. Now, I'm not an anti-charter school ideologue. I believe that charter schools and the original mission of charters are great. So if you have a stable stable K through 12 system of education in your neighborhood, and someone wants to do a school that's African-centered, hey, let's do it. But there is a charter industry that is profit-driven, and these are not-for-profit and for-profit organizations who advocate for the closing of schools, because they benefit from the closing of schools. When those schools close, they get the buildings. Right.
Well, let me ask you this: you want to see a dismantling of the public school process as it is?
No, I want to see what we want to see is equity in public education. So the public school process as it is, the change we want to see there is that if you're going to take our tax dollars, then we're going to have voice in what our schools look like. So one of the major fights I was a part of in Chicago was the hunger strike to save Walter Dyett High School. And in 2015, they had shut down. We had actually waged, after a 4-year campaign, we waged a hunger strike for a community plan for this public high school that would be connected to 6 feeder schools. In other words, a pre-K through 12 system of education in our neighborhood. But we said, no, these need to be public schools, because if the school board can tax us, if you can tax us in order to fund public schools, then we must have a say, But what school systems have done, brother, historically, is created structures to ignore the voices of Black and brown parents and communities and young people. So no, we're not talking about the dismantling of the public school system. What we are saying is that we have to increase our demand for what we want to see in the public school system. We can't act as if we are folks who will be treated right because we're valued. Everything we have in this country, everything, everything. The reason we can walk into a Walgreens and nobody stop us and say N words you can't get in is because of grassroots organizing. Every right we have comes from grassroots organizing. We've forgotten that. And so what we've done is we've to some degree relaxed. And these systems have shown that they're actually the wolf. And we don't have the infrastructure to fight back. That's what Journey for Justice Alliance is all about. Building the infrastructure for us to fight, to use community organizing as the primary tool to win equity in our school systems. Now, in regards to the charter industry, we do believe that the charter industry needs to be dismantled because, understand this point, every city where the charter industry has taken root, every city, the Black population has diminished. So the charter industry has been used in alignment with school closings as an instrument for privatization, in alignment with school closings and the loss of affordable housing as an instrument to purge Black people from urban landscapes. Chicago, in the year 2000, we were 53% of the population. Today, we're 31%. 20 years. So that's my point.
Yeah, no, let me get in on the question of that, because when you talk about long systemic racism, you talk about systemic classism, these are issues that we've been talking about for a minute. How do we achieve the level of equity that's needed for us to be able to pivot in that positive direction right now?
Absolutely. I think that one of the powers we have is the power of the vote. Now, this is one of the powers. And one of the things that we've tended to do is we've given our allegiance to the Democratic Party without a demand. I am not a fan of Donald Trump. But one thing that man says that is true is that most ghettos in the United States are governed by who? By Democrats. Mm-hmm. We've given them our vote, but what they've given us back is the hood. They've given us liquor stores on every corner, right? They've given us beauty supply houses and fried chicken places when that was not always our reality. Brother, I'm 54. I'm from the south side of Chicago. I remember a time when the person that owned the gas station was my father's friend. He looked just like my dad. I remember a time when there was not an Arab-ran liquor store on the corner of every block. But what was on the corner was a white-hand pantry ran by a man that looked like me. I remember that. Our children today don't have that memory. So what we think needs to happen is we need to stop organizing in our silos, because that is also a result of conditioning. Because racism does not just express itself through education. It expresses itself through housing, through healthcare, through food production and delivery systems, through safety, right? Mm-hmm. And so we believe that we have to advance our struggle forward by developing a quality of life agenda that we demand that Democrats support. And then organizing groups, people that have a base, people that have members, unite around that agenda, and we heighten our demand of those people who have taken our votes for granted. And that demand can be expressed locally, that demand can be expressed at the national level. And so we believe that that's an important next step.
How do we increase the mobilization, particularly when it comes to parents, right? And then also organizations. I've often had to speak on the topic of whether or not parents are apathetic or whether or not they have laryngitis because they've been speaking so long that they're tired of speaking.
And that's an excellent question. And actually, I think our people are not apathetic. Our people are oppressed, right? And there's a history of violence connected to Black organizing, not activism. When Black people have demonstrated the ability to transform minds and mobilize our people, the response has pretty much always been violent, right? So we believe And so that's why in most Black communities around the country, brother, you don't have Black-led organizing groups. Black people who were terrorized out of abandoning community organizing and doing social services. So when you go to most cities, we have great organizations that whether they do tutoring, whether they're food banks, whatever they do social services, because social services are not designed to transform conditions. Social services are designed to help people cope with conditions. And that happened because when you had organizations like the Republic of New Africa, organizations like the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, who were actually organizing groups, who actually built a base and built power, the response was military. The response, and so remember when they murdered Fred Hampton, they left Fred Hampton's house open and said, "This is what you get." And remember, this was a baby. He was a man, he was a lion. But in regards to his chronological age, he was a baby. And if they would do that to him, so that terrorized us out of organizing. And so to answer your question, the way that we get the mobilizing back is we have to implant in our communities that it's not about a charismatic leader. Ella Baker taught that lesson many, many years ago. Right. It's not about a charismatic leader. It is about creating the infrastructures in our neighborhoods where we all become leaders, where we all recognize that we have something to contribute. So if something happens to one person, we have a system in our neighborhoods. And this has to be very grassroots. We have a system in our neighborhood where people learn how do you get a stop sign put up? How do you get a speed on your block? If you want your children to learn economics and entrepreneurship in your school, how do you make that happen? Those are lessons in gaining power. And so we have to so the Journey for Justice Alliance are made up of organizations who do just that. And so we believe that has to become something that we do, and we increase the mobilization by uniting not around a singular issue. We're not fighting just for education justice. We're fighting the wolf. And the wolf does not hunt individually. The wolf hunts as a pack. It might be 20 wolves, but it's really one wolf. So that wolf can hunt down a bison, right? That a wolf can chase a bison that he can't handle by himself. But when it's 20 of those wolves and that bison goes to fight that one wolf, so imagine that one wolf is healthcare. That bison goes to fight that one wolf, then the wolf bites him on the other side. The bison turns around, tries to fight that wolf. The wolf that bit him over there is the oppression in education. It get bit somewhere else. Before they know it, the bison is tired, and the wolf pack devours the wolf. We have to approach organizing as if we are fighting the wolf pack, not an individual wolf. And so there are people doing amazing work in climate. There are people doing amazing work in education, healthcare, housing, food insecurity. We are saying unite around a platform that says that we want a quality of life agenda. And we are demanding massive investment. Think about those areas, brother. I was in Buffalo, New York, and I was talking to a group of organizers. Maybe 65% of the room was white. And this woman stepped up and she said, "Why do you always talk about race?" I said, "Well, let's conduct an experiment." I said, "I'm talking to my white brothers and sisters real quick." I said, "Raise your hand if you had a decent elementary school when you grew up." Most of them raised their hand. I said, "Raise your hand if you had a hospital in your community." They raised their hand. I said, "Raise your hand if you had a grocery store. The liquor store was not your grocery store." Most of them raised your hand. I said, "Raise your hand if you didn't really have to deal with police brutality when you was a child." Most of them raised their hand. And I asked them a very simple question. I said, "How many sit-ins did you have to do for y'all to win it? How many protests did you have to do for you to have that reality?" And they looked at me, and the Black people in the room jumped up, because we know that everything that most Americans take for granted, we must fight, claw, and scratch to get. And that's the sabotage. So we have to struggle at that same level. That's the view of the Journey for Justice Alliance.
Yeah. So Jitu, let me ask the question about people who want to get connected. We got a few minutes left, but if somebody wants to get connected to the work that you're doing, how can they get connected to the work that you're doing and be a part of your organization?
Yes, sir. We are a membership-based organization. People can support us by going to our website, www.j4jalliance.com. Our phone number is 773-548-7500. Our email is info@j4jalliance.com. You can follow us at Twitter at J4J_USA. And you can also follow us on Facebook. So we welcome any inquiries, people that are having difficulties in their cities, organizations that want to get in the fight for education and racial justice. We welcome you. So absolutely.
So we want people to get connected to the work that you guys are doing. Talk to us about, before we go, some things that you got coming up in the future and things that people can look out for.
Yes, sir. So we have a survey that's going around the country called Grassroots Voices for Public Education. This survey, what we're doing with this survey is we're just getting people's views on what they want to see in their schools. And we'll be putting that into a report in partnership with Data for Black Lives. And we'll be presenting that to the Biden administration. On May 17th and 18th, we will be having a mass mobilization, thousands of people. We're saying mask up and turn out, right? Called Equity or Else, towards a quality of life agenda. And that will be May 17th and 18th at Black Lives Matter Square in Washington, D.C. And so we're excited about that. We believe that this will be a historic event because we are, again, advancing our struggle to say that we must fight the wolf pack, not the individual wolf.
I'm going to use that somewhere else. That wolf pack thing is real.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I mean, you know, brother, if you've been on the street as long as I have, I mean, I'm 54 years old, a former football player, but I've been an organizer most of my adult life since I've been 25. And you see it over and over again. You know, good people lose faith because you fight in the system, but it's almost like throwing rocks at tanks. So the question becomes, how do we organize in a way that allows us a clear vision to see the adversary that we're fighting, but also to support each other and to have longevity, a cohort of folks. And we think that way. We think about, how do you build, when I talked about the question of leadership development, how do you build competent, accountable, trustworthy leadership from the grassroots? So I come from, my learning comes from Chicago's oldest Black-led grassroots community organization called the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. I started there as a volunteer when I was 25, eventually became a board member, board president, eventually became the education organizer. Now I'm the director of a national organization. We also have a former staff member who's leading community organizing training all over the United States. Another brother who just became president of the We Boat Foundation in Chicago, philanthropy. Another brother who took over the community organization that Barack Obama started called the Virginia Burns Hope Center. And one sister who was a parent leader who's now the alderwoman of the 20th Ward. So we have a grassroots system to develop competent, trustworthy, and accountable Black leadership. And we believe we need that in our movements. We need that movement-wide. So that's where that perspective comes from.
I hear you. Well, Jitu Brown, we want to thank you for joining us here on the Social Justice Forum, putting some things in proper perspective for us. Thank you for joining us, and we'll definitely have to have you back.
I appreciate it, brother. Please, you know, my Zoom is always open.
I think that's all of us right now. Our Zoom is always open. All right.
Always open.
Thank you, brother Jitu.
Peace to you, brother.
Peace. Well, I want to let you know, listen, we come to the end of our show today. Definitely want to thank all of our guests for joining us. Now, listen, we hope that you enjoyed the conversation and the discussion on the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forums. Now, if you want to rewatch the episode, don't forget, you can do that throughout the course of the week. Catch the recablecast right here on BronxNet TV or on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation and present your viewpoint, well, guess what? Visit our social media platforms at BronxNet TV. That about wraps it up for the Social Justice Forums. I'm Daren Jaime saying take care, God bless, and we'll see you next week on the Social Justice Forums.